So then, we are back with modern understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yirmiyahu the prophet, we also layer these understandings of the 65th and 66th chapter, plus other areas related with the time of the restoration period, simply the understanding of the returning of the cities of the Messiah as they were prior to 1009, then the economies of the world. Very important, because there is a reason every nation then is in trouble as far as financial is concerned. It is truly required for the nations becoming then unstable until the principles taught by Daniel and prior of his time, and then the new system becoming more and more evident. There is a very important article related with China making a deal with the European Union. This truly is showing the instability of the European Union and the Eurozone, and then the fragility of these systems as they understand the time of the restoration period. Truly, it's not complicated. We are then involved with a very highly computerized systems these days. You find then lots of equipment in space providing then the signal of China and many other countries related with China. Not only this, but the linking up of the monetary systems, so then transactions can be established. Mostly the problems with the economies of the world is then printing money. This truly is a huge problem. China, however, has then the forward motion, because mostly of what they do is always related with transactions. These obviously limits the number of people handling money and the production of paper money. So then people don't become then familiar and used to of wasting resources, and obviously resources that are not theirs. For some reason they think themselves selected by God. So then they do whatever they want, they steal as much as they want, and they think themselves then superior, where then when they observe themselves, the reflection of their faces, they are no more than licensed pirates. For the moment then, they begin their own quests of unveiling how scoundrels they are. These obviously gives China more forward motion, because not only this, but the Pacific is obviously in China's hands as far as the economics and the furtherance and the high level of technology related with China's signal. This truly brings peace of mind. China was predetermined for this time. And then when nations are in line with the instructions, then harmony comes. As we understand, the systems of then the West and then the European Union, those systems are failing. And it's truly obvious, because as we read then the understanding of the Messiah himself, explaining then the 1,000 years his holy cities would direct the world, and then in 1009 of the regular calendar, then you find the time of deceit, or simply no more holy cities until 2009. This period of time was then the time of the deceit, or then no holy cities. Then the world is then obviously being shaken, in economic sense speaking, so then the holy city once again can direct the nations. But for these, then obviously the instability of the system must be obvious. This gives the system then more forward motion and more stability, as nations and people and individuals are then lining up themselves with the new system, and simply means the third step. The new system is extremely familiar, and if people make purchases via online, as they purchase, they select a product, they select a form of payment, and then they receive the products at home or then delivered to their workplace. Then the third step is simply then the selecting of products for investment. Quite simple. However, the complexity of the system comes when there is a lack of a linker. Because during the time of the 1,000 years of deceit, if you study history, it is very important. It's not only you try then to be so religious, however ignorant. God won't reveal His holy plans if you don't study history. God can't remove your ignorance if you don't study. He's not coming via a frequency such as a radio frequency in your mind, giving you information if you don't take initiative then study history. You have to study, spend time studying it. As these new systems then are lining up with the system of China, then becomes a whole lot simpler. Truly, God is aware of these problems of this world, but He has principles. Thus far, you find nations then in trouble. You find the European Union every time becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. You find the West in trouble. This truly is normal. When you evaluate the span of time of 1,000 years and another 1,000 years, you find then the shaking of this world for a very special purpose. Thus then the new system. Transactions. Extremely important, as nations are then involved with regulating, spending wisely, but then securing a place of control. Then transactions are then the very core of this control. For instance, South Pacific is very responsible with their spending. And then for every piece of money taken from the system, a transaction number or ID then is given. And the whole recording system is done via these transactions. A country not responsible always then makes a choice of printing more money festival. Then the new system. What can we understand the new system? Besides the third step, you find then Daniel, the prophet. He did experience this system during his time. However, it was laborsome. He had a huge team working for Daniel and his own system of the time. Don't you think Daniel was involved with investments on products? Well, he was. Amazingly, he was. Because when he described the prophecy, what did he find out? What he was doing was then direction of trade from heaven. Daniel's question in his mind was, how can this system be improved? And what he received from heaven was simply, he couldn't have. Only the velocity of the existing system would become greater in the future. We understand it as knowledge, but knowledge is not the proper word. As we find in Hebrews, for instance, then there was a change in instructions. It's truly not a change. It is completion of. So certain words in English are very bad for the description of the actual events. Daniel was involved with a huge system. Try to imagine these CEOs of many companies of his time being directly related with Daniel. It was a vast system. When he was explaining of the 10th chapter, what he was explaining was a great portion of himself reflected in the prophecy itself. As we read Yirmiyahu the prophet, you understand Yirmiyahu is very compacted. It's compacted in a package of information where you have to understand how to read. And sometimes when you layer these understanding with the times and the seasons and the generation, yet you have then the obligation of layering further. When you then read Daniel and Ezekiel, as if you unweave sections of Yirmiyahu, so then Daniel, when he was explaining of his very own system, how his system would be used by then the Eastern Kingdom. Why? Because we are explaining of a restoration period. It's not only the holy cities, because then the Gentiles were included. When you read Yirmiyahu chapter 1:8, what do you find? Then the Gentiles would take care of their vineyards and their flocks. It's not only the actual flocks and vineyards and then being an orcharder around the holy cities. When the Gentiles were included, then you find the holy cities and the Gentiles outside of the holy cities yet working in a system of this world. Daniel was not in a holy city. He was working for a pagan king. And besides these brief moments of, in quote, religious link with the Creator himself from the viewpoint of a pagan king. However brief those moments were, such as the king of Babylon involved with the burning of the four, then the statue, then later on, those kings, they did forget. Try to understand, you are speaking of kings that drank a lot, parties mostly every day, money coming in great amounts. These people were involved with travels and construction of many kinds. Do you think they had time to spend evaluating someone else's religion? No, the more money comes in, the more they forget. So it was for a long time with the king of Babylon, then Darius the Mede, and so on and so forth. The only respect Daniel had was because of the work he was doing for the kingdom. It is true that Daniel reflected holy living. There is no question regarding it. But the direct link with the king and Daniel was very limited and mostly based from trade. So then the system of Daniel is then precisely what China is doing. The only distinction is computers, obviously they provide faster way of doing what Daniel was doing by hand. As direct as you can get as far as this new system. Reading and becoming acquainted with the credit, line of credit, investments and interests. These complicated mathematical situations were experienced by Daniel himself. And then Daniel was questioning within himself, how can this system be improved? How is it going to be the time of the end, the restoration period? And the revelation was, it won't be improved. It only becomes faster. The word restoration simply means restoring what was, making it faster, makes no news out of it. Since the Gentiles and the holy cities were included in the plan, then whatsoever we read from the 10th chapter and the 11th chapter, you find then China making the forward move. As far as the old system, regarding then the linker, as we understand, 800 years then Great Britain has led the world and discovered new lands and so on and so forth, and the British pound was worldwide used many years ago. Was the worldwide type of monetary system adopted in many parts of the world. Later on became then USD. Now we have another shift. But the troubles of the nations are absolutely normal from the perspective of lining up in harmony as it was during the time of the Messiah is absolutely normal. Now, persisting in doing wrong, then is another situation. Ezekiel, the contemporary friend of Daniel, also had this understanding with another kind of enlightenment. Daniel was a person involved with economics. If you hear an economist, then you think the guy is crazy because of the nomenclature used. Is the economist crazy? No. The other side simply does not have the nomenclature and the knowledge. Ezekiel revealed sections of these first and second sons as far as the authority of trade, economics, and then tabernacling. Daniel, you don't hear him speaking of tabernacling very often, because he was purely economics. The only section you find Daniel explaining is precisely then when Yirmiyahu the prophet had prophesied the 70 years captivity and the ending of it. When Daniel felt in his spirit that the 70 years then were ending, he then consulted per the prophecies of Yirmiyahu the prophet that it was a time for his people then to return to the Holy Land and reconstruct the temple. And some people ask how fast this system is going to be, such as the bank. Daniel the prophet was not only a trader, he was also a banker. He was responsible for the entire finances of the entire kingdom. So you combine a trade, you combine investments and interests and so on and so forth, the entire scope of trade banking. That's why then when he was explaining as far as the 10th chapter and prior of, he had to fast. Prior of the 10th chapter, with the knowledge Daniel had as a normal person doing his normal work in the spirit was not enough. He had to subject his flesh under fasting, because his everyday fleshly understanding was very strong, and the tone is obviously negative, as he was then humbling himself because he knew he was doing something that he shouldn't have. As he then secluded himself, gave the directives of the kingdom and trading and banking to somebody else or his team, then he had placed himself for prayer. Thus he said, no pleasing eating for quite some time. Try to understand the tone, Daniel said. No pleasing eating meant the very finest he could ever eat during his time. So he did step down where he was at, and he then fasted and he prayed for quite some time. He became secluded. Later he did understand. At the same time, had dawned on him But what else can be done other than these? Because during his time, what he was doing was perfect. It was a perfect system. And then the reply was, nothing else is going to be then placed in the system other than becoming faster. Thus, computerized systems. Then Daniel wanted more information as far as then he got in his flesh again. Then he wanted more information. And then you simply said, no more. Close up then the understandings because it's for the time of the end. Then he said, as for you, then you must rest with your fathers until the time comes. And that was it. From then on, Daniel simply resumed what he was doing and then he studied the instructions, but he did not receive any more understandings. Those layers were then given and closed. So then, next time we're going to try to talk of salvation and tabernacling and the importance of Ezekiel, because Ezekiel combined what Daniel had. Ezekiel was directly related with Daniel during his time, as Ezekiel was another part of the region. Ezekiel was involved with the trade of Daniel. Thus he was far, but he was linked with the system. As Ezekiel was understanding then the first and second sons, then he was combining both sticks of authority. Daniel couldn't observe, because he was so involved because of his position of responsibility. However, Ezekiel, he was receiving these understandings of this perfect system. Yet, because of his partial involvement with it, then he did understand other layers. Thus, he did understand the first son and the second son. And he knew at some point those places should be restored. But the most important is Daniel was making reference regarding Yirmiyahu's prophecies. This shows great stability of his own prophecies because he was constantly making reference. These references are not only related with the Holy Land. Daniel was given this responsibility of showing the Gentile world how the time of the end would play out. When the system comes, people are going to be so familiar with these, and a lot of them will enjoy the system, can be sure of it. The list of products in the system is, from a human viewpoint, is nearly uncountable if there is an existence of this world. innumerable. And as then the pyramids of so many of these governments is then waning, and people are becoming more aware of and becoming more on their case as far as wasteful living, then people are even further more conscientious of transactions. It's a very inviting, pleasing type of system. As you are responsible, the system is responsible. Later on then, coming then salvation, tabernacling, and then the combination of these systems. So please stay tuned. Much more than that.